Good day to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today on World Buddhist TV. On behalf of Buddhist Sankhayus for the DhammaTalks series of DhammaTalks sponsored by World Buddhist Sankhayus and Kun Tong Ta Christiansen's Thai Danish Association. I'm Venerable Pramahasompong from Wat Arun, Bangkok, Thailand, in charge of moderators. It's our great opportunities to introduce to the English-speaking audience to present their own experience, especially about spirituality as a form for qualified people to present their spiritual pilgrimage to our viewing audience. Our guest today is James Marshall, and the topic we will explore and discuss is about spiritual pilgrimage. I think the audience you will appreciate for the last show about the spiritual map, and then we will continue with our speaker today. Welcome, Jim, to the show.
Sawadee Krap. Thank you for having me here, Venerable Sampong.
Yes. First of all, I would like you to ask, how are you today?
I'm very happy to be here, and I feel very fortunate to have this opportunity to share my experiences with yourself as well as your viewing audience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you again for his joining us, and I think it's we have the more opportunity to discuss the spirituality, right? So today I think is you can go to please brief about the last show a little bit, and then we have to move on to the next picture of your map. So please.
Well, to summarize, the development or the pilgrimage of Buddhist tradition throughout history and throughout the world is that it gets introduced to new cultures on a fairly regular basis. But it turns out that each of these cultures both mutually support but actually distort the Dharma in slightly different ways. And in that change brings some vitality and new perspective to traditional teachings. Primarily because the different cultures have to adjust to the different kinds of ideas, different kinds of symbolisms, and different expectations.
Exactly.
And in doing so, they actually have to translate many of the ideas and terms into their own vernacular in such a way that they can start adopting the practices. And as they adopt the practices, they discover that their experiences are exactly the same as the more traditional cultures.
Right.
And that's the exciting aspect of the Buddha Dharma in its most fundamental sense.
Right.
What I have been able to do is to look at the traditional teachings of both Mahayana and Hinayana.
Right.
And what I was able to do is look at that pilgrimage journey itself and translate it into, let us say, more familiar terms for the Western audience.
Right. I see.
What seemed to be the case is the Hinayana application of the Buddhist symbolism was a little bit too simple.
And very simple. It is.
It was simplified to the point where it was very difficult to get information out of the symbolism. What happened to the Mahayana tradition? It was much too complicated.
Yeah.
And so in this regard, what I chose to do is to look at, again, a middle ground between the two traditions and look at simplifying it to a point where it was more comprehensible, but also having it more complete insofar as having a logical or a more comprehensive explanation of the different symbols.
Right. So, yes, you please show us about the map.
Let's go ahead and set it up in a... This first pictograph here, and pictographic learning is very, very old, much older than Buddhism itself.
Really?
And
what's happened before, as you mentioned, before Buddhism?
Well, pictographic learning it doesn't restrict itself to a specific language. It uses symbols in order to organize different ideas. And it turns out that human beings are very good at organizing pictures into a kind of a literal idea
I see.
that has continuity. In Western science terms, it's called symbol strings.
Symbol string.
Which means that if you follow the symbol string, you get to a very consistent outcome.
Yeah.
And that's what meditation is all about, is encouraging a consistent outcome, doing a specific practice. And that's what Buddhism has done. And this particular pictograph here is a simplified version of the Mahayana, what's called Bhava Chakra.
Power chakra. The wheel of life.
The wheel of life.
Yeah.
And their picture was very complicated. And what I did is essentially summarized that picture. And what it says in that picture is you start in the middle.
Right.
Naturally, you're in balance. And that what happens is when you get involved in relationships or issues or emotional issues or intellectual issues, you get out of balance in those ways. And what this pictograph emphasizes is, or explains, are the conditions of how you are out of balance. And all it does is remind you that this is what you're doing in that regard.
Yeah.
And if you want to get back in balance, you need to stop doing that.
Right.
And all it is a reminder that the conditions here are numerous. And what the Buddha actually said early on was that it's not cause and effect.
Not cause and effect. What is about?
Cause and conditions.
Cause and conditions.
Yes. The conditions are numerous.
Numerous.
Your specific cause could be any single event.
Yeah.
But it turns out the conditions that surround that event can give you numerous different kinds of outcomes. And what this pictograph emphasizes is the different influences that can affect any decision that you make.
Yeah.
And the Buddha was excellent in this regard. And
what is that for the Buddha's excellent?
well, what my argument here traditionally is that Buddhism is very academic in its dharma, and that you are criticized very strongly if you don't choose the academic course in your Buddhist study.
Right.
There is also another part of that, and that's the yoga, the actual practices. And that has a different flavor, let us say. For example, the Buddha went out into the jungle and lived in a cave.
Live in the cave.
Actually, I sat in the cave at Bodh Gaya that the Buddha meditated in, and it turned out it's very small and very uncomfortable.
Yeah. So how many times you have been to Bodh Gaya?
Bodh Gaya, I only spent that one time in Bodh Gaya.
Oh, really?
But I spent several months there.
I have been there twice. You know?
Oh, it's a wonderful experience.
Wonderful, yeah.
But what Buddha said or is emphasizing is there's a traditional academic application of the Dharma, but there's a physical yoga, meditational application of Dharma, and they're two different applications.
Right.
And what this map emphasizes is not just the academic part of your spiritual training, but the actual physical yogas and the physical journey itself. So what I did is, again, looked at the Bhava Chakra, translated it into simpler terms for the lay person.
For the lay person.
By the way, I've been criticized by the academics that this isn't academic.
Yeah.
my argument was, is it helpful in helping a person in their pilgrimage?
I
And
see.
it conceded that it was, but it wasn't academic.
Right.
So we need to establish that.
Okay.
This particular pictograph here
Yeah.
is the initial idea
Yeah. Please.
that we are living in an illusion, an illusory environment.
Yeah.
And that illusory environment is typically explained as the tree of life.
The tree of life. What does mean?
Well, the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree.
Oh, really? As we mentioned, the Buddha, as you mentioned, the Buddha is regarded as the preserver of nature. His birth under the tree, his enlightenment, his passing away under the tree. That's why everything about the nature.
Well, certainly that symbolism is essential in the Buddhist understanding of the pilgrimage itself. Is that tree here, the tree, then the tree of life, essentially.
Tree of life. Yeah.
You have a tree of life and actually a tree of knowledge, and you have a number of other tree conditions. But the symbolism of the tree is very helpful in appreciating the pathway through just ordinary human conditions, which most of us have to go through anyway. Even monks and nuns were people at some time themselves and had to look at the illusion as part of their lifestyle before they become monks or nuns. And that to appreciate that is important. And to appreciate that their sangha, their parishioners, actually are living within those conditions and cannot really be ignored.
Right.
What this tree of life actually establishes in a symbolic way is that you have the roots here of the tree of life.
What is the root of tree of life?
And if you think of the roots of the tree of life as your arms, and you reach down into your past, and one arm is your father, and one arm is your mother.
Oh, great.
And then the fingers are your grandparents, and all of the people that had to be alive, had to have children, and raise those children to a point where they could have children. If you can imagine the incredible amount of energy that went into energy and caring and education and skillful means that it took to get you here in the first place, from this branch of your mother, this branch of your father. And part of this branch, the roots of the tree of life, is understanding that if you live a reasonable life, if you live a wholesome life, if you live a rational life, then all of that effort that all of these people were put into getting you here in the first place is reasonable and appropriate. And also that you would want your children to live a reasonable, appropriate life.
Exactly.
And so understanding the roots of the tree of life as you have a responsibility to a vast number of people that had to exist and had to raise children in order for you to be here. A huge litany of...
Yes, for the symbolism of this, the root of the tree, as you mentioned, you mean like relatives, right?
You have, yes, physical relatives.
Have the relationship. I think this idea is based on it's like a cooperative, codependent origination, especially everything interdependent. It's like an interrelative. For example, as you mentioned, we cannot, stay alone. We are, interrelated to others. Especially mother, father, or our grandmother, grandfather, or even the family members. In the beginning, right? In the beginning, that's interdependent. In this point, I think it's very important to understand the interdependent of everything. Start with the root of the root of the tree. As in our family, we have many. The step to understand, to take responsibility to the society, starting from the near and dear society, which is our family members and community members, or even the national, citizen, and in the larger number is the global, areas, or the earth, the world, the whole world, to live together, interdependent. I appreciate that.
Well, by the
As your
symbolism,
true symbolism.
by the symbolism and by the Buddhist argument, that is the truth. We are dependent on one another. It's essential that we get along, and that it's the foundation of the practices themselves. Is that we're not doing them for ourselves.
Right.
We're certainly doing it to help and become better people ourselves, but we are all connected. We are all dependent on one another, and that dependency is essential and important. From this root, you have the first document here is called the wish-fulfilling gem.
What is about that?
The wish-fulfilling gem is an idea that you understand the foundation of life itself, and that you actually wish or encourage it to be useful, reasonable, and appropriate. You can't just say, well, it is that way, or that someone else is responsible. You personally have to say, I actually wish it to be true for myself.
Yeah, that's what we call individual responsibility.
Absolutely, and it's done very personally and very privately, and it's done almost exclusively by yourself.
By ourselves first.
And when that is done, then you start noticing what is called the tree of life itself. And the definition of the tree of life here is the tree of life binds us together regardless of our conflicts. There is some kind of motivation for us to get along, even though we mostly don't get along. We're patient, we're understanding, we're kind. But even when we're not that way, there's undermining or a foundation of all of this is that actually we should be able to get along. And one of the comments that I liked is that all war eventually leads to talking.
That's in this idea, the talking very important, right? But
So
dialogue is called dialogue.
So there's conflicts here, but all the conflicts eventually lead to talking.
Exactly.
You can't keep the conflict up for long until you start talking. So the talking is a reflection of the tree of life binding us in a very mystical, metaphysical way, and something that we mostly don't notice or appreciate, but should. That's what the Buddha Dharma actually in this format here reminds us, that these conditions are always true, have always been true, have been true since the Buddha time, and will be true from now on.
Now on. Okay.
Now what happens at this particular juncture is that you have pathways through this human condition.
Human condition. What's about that human?
Well, the human condition is not everybody chooses to be monk.
Exactly.
That's true.
Even me, in the beginning, I never decided to become novice or monks, a monastic life, to stay monastic life. But my mom, my aunt, he wanted to encourage me, to study. A good opportunity to study, especially at that time. We have no opportunity for the poor family, and then that's why we depend on monastic. Monastic life. Otherwise, no education. That's I think is relevant to this.
Well, certainly that sometimes is a choice, and sometimes it seems like you don't have a choice. But it turns out that mostly you do. And what this symbolism done is here within the tree of life, you look at what are called a symbol string of choice. For example, I want to become a business person. Well, the model for a business person is like a pyramid where the boss is on top and everybody thinks this is very stable and everybody thinks the boss is doing well. Well, it turns out that's not a very reasonable model for business or relationships or any other kind of organizational process. It turns out that all organizational processes and any kind of cooperative effort is essentially unstable. It takes lots of energy to get anything operating, functional, and working. So if you think of the pyramid as turned over, you get the idea of a stake. And the symbol here is, are you going to get a stake in this idea? with the symbolism here is, do you get the point?
Yeah.
If you don't get the point of the product or the idea or the organization, you can't participate in it.
Right.
The next thing is you have to begin. You have to show up at the office. You have to show up at the lecture. You have to be there in order to participate and begin. If you don't begin, you will not be able to participate. If you don't become friends, if you don't feel a friendly environment or it doesn't have a friendly condition,
Right.
you won't continue. The next is you have new experiences.
New experience. What's that about new experience?
Well, the product gives you new experiences, or the organization you get involved in gives you new, more wholesome experiences.
Oh.
And so if this doesn't happen, you can't participate. You won't participate because it's not a new experience. Now, these three conditions can take place very quickly.
What's about that?
It can happen within a few minutes. But if it doesn't happen, you can't go on and participate in a very formal way where you actually buy the product or participate in the organization.
Right.
So what these symbol strings do on the tree of life in this particular mapping strategy is to remind you that you have other options than the one you chose. And other people have chosen different options. It doesn't mean their options are better.
Yeah.
It just means they're different.
Yep.
And that these differences are actually a wholesome part of the Buddha Dharma.
Right.
And I know there's been some argument about the diversity within the Buddha Dharma.
Exactly.
And my argument is that it's the diversity in the Buddha Dharma that gives the Buddha Dharma its wholesomeness. It gives it its vitality.
Skillful.
Well, it's part of skillful means, and that's what the Buddha actually encouraged.
Right.
Traditions don't necessarily encourage diversity because they feel threatened by new ideas.
Right.
But that's not what the Buddha said.
Ah.
But what this symbol string process of the tree of life actually tries to remind people is that regardless of your pathway through this process, it has comparable virtue.
Yep.
And it will lead you to different doorways into the different parts of your spiritual path or your spiritual pilgrimage through life. This symbol process is a nautilus, a chamber nautilus. And what it does is that learning process is, again, a building process. For example, you have to begin. You have to decide that you need to learn something before you do learn something.
Yeah.
If you think you know everything there is to know, then you're not going to be here.
Right.
The next is childlike quality.
Childlike quality, what does that mean?
The children, if you look at children, they're interested in learning all the time.
Exactly.
Adults aren't necessarily that way.
Sometimes it's not only children, even us.
Well, my argument here and what the symbol string says is if you are interested in learning, you are childlike.
Right.
You bring that character to the learning process. And that's what makes the learning process vital.
Vital.
And if it's not there, it is not vital. You really don't learn very much. So when you look at people participating in a learning or a personal growth process, if they're not engaged, if they're not excited, if they don't have wide eyes, and if they don't make mistakes and are clumsy, then they're not childlike. They're being mechanical.
Mechanical.
Then you learn. Then eventually you have a rebellion.
Rebellion.
Within your learning process. You go, this cannot possibly be true. And rebelling against your teachers or your parents is what happens eventually within the learning process. You say, well, I have to use this information and apply it to my own life, which means I have to change. And that change is a rebellion.
Right.
And that happens fairly early on in the learning process. But if you only rebel, then that's all you do.
Yeah.
And what this symbol string process reminds you is that you're here when you're doing a rebellion, and you're not anyplace else.
Yeah.
The next thing is you have to submit.
Submit what?
Submit to conditions.
To condition.
And once you say, all right, I've rebelled, I've made my statement, I understand that it has limitations.
Yeah.
Any of these conditions will have limitations within their application. Then you submit to some kind of condition that is bigger than rebellion.
Yeah.
then you produce things, then you organize things and change things, and then what happens is you have to endure your choices. And that actually takes a lot of meditational effort.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And you say, all right, now I'm a physicist or I'm a scientist. Now I have to be a scientist for 25 years or
Only
30 years.
25, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And that's a long time to do anything that once you have established your personal growth profile, then you have to live with that. Eventually you let go of it.
Yep, let go of. Yep.
You let go of any of your choices and you return to some kind of initial condition, which I'm calling now.
Now.
You actually,
Very important.
What is taking place right now and how can I contribute to that condition?
Yeah, you know, so in Buddhism, especially in our tradition, we have the 10 way of thinking. Now is one of the thinking. We call the now is a full moon thinking.
Full moon thinking.
Yeah.
Well, now or the present time, mathematically is open.
Yeah.
It is the only actual time in science or in mathematics.
Yeah.
There's no future, there's no
Yep.
Other time. Are we?
Yep. We continue with.
Okay.
Yep.
The central area here is called the house within. Now, in Christianity in the West, they have the house of the Lord is within, and then they don't know very much more about it. In fact, they don't know any more about it than that. What the Buddha and what this symbol string process and what the Tree of Life actually has done over the last 2,500 years is to explain in more detail what that house actually is.
Yeah.
And what we do here is you have a foundation for your house.
Yep.
And in Buddhism, you have to have a healthy body.
Healthy body, exactly. Very needed.
Yeah. If you don't have a healthy body, then you can be very distracting. If you're in pain or if you're not paying attention to your body makes a huge contribution in your life. In fact, it's mostly your life.
Yep.
The next is you have to have an open mind.
What's that about open mind?
Now, open mind is at some time in your life, you have to notice that the decisions that you've made may be limiting in some way.
Yeah.
And the question is there something else? Is there a new way of perceiving? Is there another way of understanding my conditions? If you don't have this window of opportunity, you simply will not proceed on to the next process.
Yeah.
And at some time you have to have reason.
Now it's now it's a lot of fun, you know, for you to view our program, because at the end of the program we continue with this map, because our guest very intelligent on this matters. So that's why at the end of the program I would like to show you about Buddhist humor. If you take interest in this book produced by our guest speaker Jim Marshall or Dr. Upashkal Yasha, we would like you to call us under the email address and telephone. So if you have any comment, any question, please feel free to do so. If you want to learn more about our World Buddhist Sangha Youth, please welcome. And thank you very much. See you next time, same place.